Hey, mister, can you help me get home? I don't know how to do directions. Well, I can draw you a map, but you're going to have to listen and store the information in your head. And I'm not here to tell you life was better before cell phones. It wasn't. I love my phone. I'm addicted to that thing. You ever lose your phone? Oh, that's a panic attack. I lost my kid at the mall one time. I didn't panic like that. Because I have 2 kids. Never has technology moved so quickly as the past 20 plus years. My son was at my house a couple of years ago. He called my mom, his grandma. He turns to me, he goes, I think grandma's phone's broken. I go, why? He goes, listen to this. I go, it's a busy signal. He'd never heard one. He goes, now what do I do? I go, hang up. He goes, how do I leave a message? You don't. He goes, now what do I do? I go, well, wait a few minutes. Call her back. He goes, that's stupid. And I don't know what it was like in your house growing up. My house growing up, my dad never answered the phone. He wasn't getting out of his big old chair. That phone rang, he'd just look at us kids. It was our job to answer the phone, right? I was telling my son that story one day. He goes, why didn't you tell your dad to get the phone? My World War II Marine dad? I tried it once. Had no idea to get out of the chair that quickly. When I woke up, that phone was inside me.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Wasdin Wednesday, July the 12th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Stuart Varney, My Take, The Rape of the Mind, No Free Lunch, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Representative Jim Jordan, Tucker-Carlson, and SEAL Team 6. It'll be part 1 of Chapter 5. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Love
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Econometricism is just as philosophical as any other ism, and worse than others in its lack of self-awareness. The effort to replace the human action of economics with a spreadsheet is the most ignorant and arrogant development in the history of economic error. We can never at one and the same time question all traditional values. Such absolute doubt could lead only to the destruction of our civilization, and in view of the numbers to which economic progress has allowed the human race to grow, to extreme misery and starvation. Complete abandonment of all traditional values is of course impossible. It would make man incapable of acting. F.A. Hayek. Human action flows out of value systems. Those who hold traditional values in disdain have every right to put the burden of legitimacy on those who hold to them. But human action throughout history has led to greater growth and less misery. Those who would dismiss the traditions and values that have accompanied human action throughout civilization carry a burden themselves, accounting for what value system will replace that which we dismiss without wreaking havoc on civilization. It's a tall order.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Stuart Varney.
The mayor of New York City is Eric Adams, and he says we need to let the illegal migrants who are in the country work. Roll tape.
Nothing is more anti-American that you can't have a job when you come to America.
What's important here is that he's partially right. This is what the left likes to do. Our enemies they'll say something that is partially correct. Okay, and this is one of the ways they pull off these the fallacies. Something is partially correct. It sounds good, but when you think about it, you realize it's wrong. What he's missing here is when people come to this country legally. He's missing that word. Yes, denying somebody that comes here legally a job just because they're new to this country is un-American. Denying people that have broken the law, that are here illegally, a job that rightfully belongs to somebody who came here legally is American. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Stuart Varney's My Take.
The only big thing this administration likes is big government.
So he's missing the point here. It's not big government. It's an issue of rights. Big government is you can't define it. What is big government? How big is big government? How big is too big? There's nobody ever bothers to define it. So it's irrelevant. It's constitutional government, and more important, it's a question of rights. Does the government think it has rights? And the answer to that question is yes, it does. The federal government, state government, counties, cities think that they have the right to do certain things. And as a matter of fact, they do not. So that is the real issue here. That's what people need to talk about. That's what people need to stand up against, is government rights. The people have the rights. The government has a limited authority, limited responsibility, and we know that by looking at the Constitution of the United States. Not only does the government not have rights to do anything in particular, according to the Declaration of Independence, no government has even the right to exist. Because it says in the Declaration of Independence, any government that is abusive of the aims or the purpose of securing the rights of its citizens should be altered or abolished. So, think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Mass conditioning through speech. According to official Pavlovian psychology, human speech is also a conditioned reflex activity. Pavlov distinguished between stimuli of the first order, which condition men and animals directly, and stimuli of the second order, with weaker and more complicated conditioning qualities. In this so-called second signal system, verbal cues replace the original physical sound stimuli. Pavlov himself did not give much attention to this second signal system. It was especially after Stalin's publication in 1950 on the significance of linguistics for mass indoctrination, as quoted by Dobrogev, that the Russian psychologist began to do work in this area. In his letter, Stalin followed Engels' theory that language is the characteristic human bit of adaptive equipment. That tone and sound in speech have a conditioning quality is something we can verify from our own experience in listening to or in giving commands, or in dealing with our pets. Even the symbolic and semantic meaning of words can acquire a conditioning quality. The word traitor, for example, provokes direct feelings and reactions in the minds of those who hear it spoken, even if this discriminatory label is being applied dishonestly. Through an elaborate study on speech reflexes written by one of the leading Russian psychologists, Dobrogev, we get a fairly good insight into the ways in which speech patterns and word signals are used in the service of mass conditioning, by means of propaganda and indoctrination. The basic problems for the man-tamer are rather simple. Can man resist a government bent on conditioning him? What can the individual do to protect his mental integrity against the power of a forceful collectivity? Is it possible to do away with every vestige of inner resistance? Pavlov had already explained that man's relation to the external world and to his fellow men is dominated by secondary stimuli, the speech symbols. Man learns to think in words and in the speech figures given him, and these gradually condition his entire outlook on life and on the world. As Dobrogev says, the language is a means of man's adaptation to his environment. We could rephrase this statement in this way. Man's need for communication with his fellow men interferes with his relation to the outside world, because language and speech itself, the verbal tools we use, are variable and not objective. Dobrogev continues, speech manifestations represent conditioned reflex functions of the human brain. In a simpler way, we may say he who dictates and formulates the words and phrases we use, he who is master of the press and radio is master of the mind. In the Pavlovian strategy, terrorizing force can be finally replicated by a new organization of the means of communication. Ready-made opinions can be distributed day by day through press, radio, and so on, again and again, till they reach the nerve cell and implant a fixed pattern of thought in the brain. Consequently, guided public opinion is the result, according to Pavlovian theoreticians, of good propaganda technique, and the polls, a verification of the temporary successful action of the Pavlovian machinations on the mind. Yet the polls may only count what people pretend to think and believe because it is dangerous for them to do otherwise. Such is the Pavlovian device. Repeat mechanically your assumptions and suggestions, diminish the opportunity of communicating dissent and opposition. This is the simple formula for political conditioning of the masses. This is also the actual ideal of some of our public relation machines, who thus hope to manipulate the public into buying a special soap or voting for a special party. The Pavlovian strategy in public relations has people conditioned more and more to ask themselves, what do other people think? As a result, a common delusion is created. People are incited to think what other people think, and thus public opinion may mushroom out into a mass prejudice. Expressed in psychoanalytic terms, through daily propagandistic noise backed up by forceful verbal cues, people can be more and more focused to identify with the powerful noisemaker. Big Brother's voice resounds in all the little brothers. News from Red China, as reported by neutral Indian journalists, tells us the Chinese leaders are using this vocal conditioning to the public to strengthen their regime. New York Times, November 27, 1954. Throughout the country, radios and loudspeakers are broadcasting the official truths. The sugary voices take possession of people. The cultural tyranny traps their ears with the loudspeakers, telling them what they may and may not do. This microphone regimentation was foreseen by the French philosopher La Rochefoucauld, who, in the 18th century, said, "A man is like a rabbit. You catch him by the ears." During the Second World War, the Nazis show that they, too, were very much aware of this conditioning power of the word. I saw their strategy work in Holland. The radio constantly spread political suggestions and propaganda, and people were obliged to listen because of the simple act of turning off one's radio was in itself suspicious. I remember one day during the occupation when I was taking a bicycle trip with some friends. We stopped off to rest at a cafe that we later realized was a true Nazi nest. When the radio, which had been on ever since we arrived, announced a speech by Hitler, everyone stood up in awe, and it was a must to take in the verbal conditioning by the Fuhrer. My friends and I had to stand up too. We were forced to listen to that raucous voice crackling in our ears and to summon all our resistance against the long, boring, repetitive attack on our eardrums and minds. Throughout the occupation, the Nazis printed tons of propaganda, big lies and distortions. They even went so far as to paint their slogans on the stoops of the houses and on the streets. Every week, newly fabricated stereotypes ogled at us as if to convince us of the splendor of the Third Reich. But the Nazis did not know to correct Pavlovian strategy. By satisfying their own need to discuss and vary their arguments in order to make them seem more logical, they only increased the resistance of the Dutch people. This resistance was additionally fortified by the London radio, on which the Dutch could hear the sane voice of their own legal government. Had the Nazis not argued and justified so much, and had they been able to prevent all written, printed, or spoken communication, the long period of boredom would have inhibited our democratic conditioning, and we might well have been more seduced by the Nazi oversimplifications and slogans.
And that was Mass Conditioning Through Speech from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Thank you, Chairman Cole. I appreciate it. As the proud daughter of a former United States Navyman who served in the Vietnam War, I just want to say I really want to support the NDAA, but I have some amendments that I'd like to bring forward. I filed 6 amendments, which I would ask the Rules Committee to consider. Amendment 103 prohibits Ukraine funding until a diplomatic solution to the war is reached. My amendment prohibits funds from being provided to Ukraine until the President certifies to Congress that a diplomatic solution has been achieved to the war. President Biden's decision to send billions of dollars worth of weapons and aid to Ukraine has engaged the United States in a proxy war with Russia that we cannot afford and jeopardizes all peace efforts. Instead of funding an endless war overseas, the United States should seek a peaceful end to the conflict, which will save lives. And I brought this as a printout. It's a copy from the Department of Defense on what our Department of Defense mission is. It reads, "We are your defense. The Department of Defense is America's largest government agency. With our military tracing its roots back to pre-revolutionary times, the department has grown and evolved with our nation. Our mission is to provide the military forces needed to deter war and ensure our nation's security." Those are 2 things that is the mission for the Department of Defense: deter war and ensure our nation's security. Funding a war in Ukraine does neither one of those. And this is why there should be no funding for a war in Ukraine that does not meet the mission of the Department of Defense. The next amendment, Amendment 104, strikes the feasibility study on establishing a center of excellence in Ukraine. My amendment reorients our national defense policies and priorities towards America first. The U.S. should not be collaborating with the government of Ukraine to establish any center in Ukraine, regardless of the purpose. Although I sympathize greatly with those who have experienced traumatic brain injuries and amputations, we have American veterans who have experienced traumatic brain injuries as well as amputations. We should not be devoting time and resources and putting the people of Ukraine over American citizens and over American veterans. We should be only helping our American citizens first.
Thank you. And now a couple of minutes with Jim Jordan, who's talking about the weaponization of our government.
Is real and not Russian disinformation is particularly troubling. The FBI had the laptop in their possession since December 2019 and had warned social media companies repeatedly to look out for, quote, hack and dump operation by the Russians prior to the 2020 election. Even after Facebook specifically asked whether the laptop story was Russian disinformation, the FBI refused to comment, resulting in social media companies' suppression of this story, and as a result, millions of our fellow citizens did not hear the story prior to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Additionally, the FBI was included in industry meetings, bilateral meetings, received and forwarded alleged misinformation to social media companies, and actually misled companies in regard to the laptop story. When the court says the FBI misled, that's a nice way of saying they lied. They lied, and as a result, important information was kept from we the people days before the most important election we have, election of President of the United States, election of the Commander-in-Chief. In a survey last fall, 4 out of 5 Americans said they believe there's a two-tiered system of justice in America today. They said that because there is. They said that because of what they've witnessed. Think about what Americans have seen. National School Board Association, left-wing political group, writes the White House and asks them to treat parents at school board meetings as terrorists. And the Garland Justice Department does just that. They put together a memo, set up a dedicated line of threat communication. Pro-life Catholics, they called radical. They want them to pay for a new FBI headquarters. And they want FISA reauthorization of the 702 program in its current form. It's in the director's opening statement. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. There are 204,000 reasons why Republicans will oppose FISA reauthorization in its current form. 204,000 times the FBI improperly searched the 702 database. And unlike the FBI censorship, in the court's opinion, that was focused on conservatives, the FBI's illegal scrutiny wasn't just limited to conservatives. BLM supporters were illegally scrutinized by the FBI as well. And I hope our Democrat friends will join us in opposing reauthorization of Section 702 the way it's currently done. And I think they will. And I hope they will work with us in the appropriations process to stop the weaponization of the government against the American people and end this double standard that exists now in our justice system.
And that was Jim Jordan about stopping the weaponization of the government against the American people. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, about 1 minute of an interview by Russell Brand of Tucker-Carlson about architecture.
Architecture changed completely, and it went from designs that complemented the landscape around them to a kind of architecture that clearly hates people, that is designed to oppress the human spirit and make people feel without value, worthless. I think if you brought someone from the streets of Tokyo to the Cotswolds and said, what do you think of that building? He would say, that's beautiful. Because beauty is inherent. Every person recognizes beauty. A Shinto temple in Kyoto, I recognize it immediately as beautiful because it is. It's consistent with the symmetry of nature.
Municipal and state buildings were once plainly an expression of a contract between the people and their government of a good faith relationship.
I think that. I just thought that. I walked up with my wife in the rain on a village hall, and I thought, whoever built that cared about the people. It was built by the people who live there for the people who live there, and they loved the people who live there because they were related to them or knew them. It was built by peasants without machines. Architecture.
And that was Russell Brand interviewing Tucker-Carlson about architecture, the state of architecture today. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, part 1 of Chapter 5 of SEAL Team 6 by Howard-Wasdin.
5. The only easy day was yesterday. When I showed up at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, I walked over the sand berm and saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time. Huge waves crashed in. Holy crap. I jumped into the balmy California water. It wasn't balmy, especially in comparison to the Florida Gulf waters I'd trained in. That's freezing! I popped out quicker than I jumped in. Wonder how much time we're going to have to spend in that. During the days leading up to training, SEAL Master Chief Rick Knepper helped prepare us with early morning swims in the pool and late afternoon calisthenics on the beach. Master Chief looked like an ordinary guy in his 40s, calmly exercising as we grunted and groaned. He didn't seem to break a sweat. Master Chief didn't tell us about his experiences in Vietnam. We would have to find out about them from others. Master Chief had served with SEAL Team 1, Delta Platoon, 2nd Squad. His squad thought they knew about Hon Tai, a large island in Nha Trang Bay. From a distance, the island looked like a big rock sitting in the ocean for birds to take a crap on. Then 2 Viet Cong, tired of fighting and being away from family, defected from the island and told U.S. intelligence about the camp full of VC they left behind. Under the cover of darkness, Master Chief Knepper's squad of 7 SEALs arrived by boat. Not even the moon shone. His squad free-climbed a 350-foot cliff. After reaching the top, they lowered themselves into the VC camp. The 7-man squad split into 2 fire teams, taking off their boots and going barefoot to search for a VIP to snatch. Going barefoot didn't leave behind telltale American boot prints in the dirt. It also made it easier to detect booby traps, and bare feet were easier to pull out of mud than boots. In the camp, though, the VC surprised the SEALs. A grenade landed at Lieutenant J.G. Bob Carey's feet. It exploded, slamming him into the rocks and destroying the lower half of his leg. Lieutenant Carey managed to radio the other fire team. When the team arrived, they caught the VC in a deadly crossfire. 4 VC tried to escape, but the SEALs mowed them down. 3 VC stayed to fight, and the SEALs cut them down too. The hospital corpsman SEAL lost his eye. One of the SEALs put a tourniquet on Carey's leg. The SEAL squad snatched several VIPs, along with 3 large bags of documents, including a list of VC in the city, weapons, and other equipment. Lieutenant Carey continued to lead Master Chief Knepper and the others in their squad until they were evacuated. The intel received from the documents and VIPs gave critical information to the Allied forces in Vietnam. Lieutenant Carey received the Medal of Honor and would go on to become Nebraska's governor and senator. Our mentors were among the best in the business. On the first morning of indoctrination into BUDS, we had to do the physical screening test again. After a cold shower and some push-ups, we began the test. Afraid of failing the swim, I kicked and stroked for all I was worth. Somehow, I completed it in time. Then we did the push-ups, sit-ups, chin-ups, and run. One guy failed. He hung his head as the instructor sent him packing. That evening, the SEAL instructors stood before us and introduced themselves. At the end, Lieutenant Moore told us we could quit if we wanted to by walking outside and ringing the bell 3 times. "I'll wait," Lieutenant Moore said. I thought the lieutenant was bluffing, but some of my classmates began ringing the bell. A number of my remaining classmates were impressive. An Ironman triathlete, a college football player, and others. One evening in the barracks, I looked at myself in the mirror. These guys are like racehorses. What the hell am I doing here? The next day, Ironman rang the bell. I couldn't understand why. One of our first training evolutions included the obstacle course, O course. One night a SEAL might have to exit a submerged submarine, hang on for dear life as his Zodiac jumps over waves, scale a cliff, hump through enemy territory to his objective, scale a 3-story building, do his deed, and get the hell out. The O course helps prepare a man for that kind of work. It has also broken more than one trainee's neck or back. Climbing over the top of the 60-foot cargo net is a bad time to lose arm strength. Much of our training was dangerous and injuries were common. We lined up in alphabetical order by our last names. I stood near the end, watching everyone else take off before me. When my turn came, I took off like a cruise missile. I couldn't understand why I was passing so many people. Partway through, I ran to the bottom of a 3-story tower. I jumped up and grabbed the ledge to the 2nd floor, then swung my legs up. I jumped up and grabbed the ledge to the 3rd floor, then swung my legs up. Then I came back down. As I moved on to more obstacles, I noticed someone stuck behind on the 3-story tower. There stood Mike W., who had played football at the University of Alabama. Tears of frustration streaming down his face because he couldn't make it to the 3rd floor. With a hint of Georgia in his accent, Instructor Stoneclam yelled, "You can run up and down a college football field, but you can't get up to the top of one obstacle, you sissy!" I wondered what the hell was wrong with Mike W. He was in way better shape than I was. Wasn't he? Mike would severely injure his back, but Captain Bailey kept him around doing therapy for almost a year. Later, he became an outstanding SEAL officer. A number of the racehorses were the biggest crybabies. They'd probably been number 1 much of their lives, and now when they had their first taste of adversity, Bud style, they couldn't handle it. What the hell is wrong with these prima donnas? Although running and swimming came hard for me, the obstacle course turned out to be one of my favorite events. Bobby H. and I were always pushing each other out of the number 1 ranking. Instructor Stoneclam advised a student, "Look how Wasdin attacks the obstacles." I'd rather be doing this than picking watermelons. Danger had become a constant companion. Danger or no danger, one of our instructors always spoke in the same monotone. In a classroom at the Naval Special Warfare Center, Instructor Blah's jungle boot stepped on a 13-foot-long black rubber boat resting on the floor in front of my class. "Today I'm going to brief you on surf passage. This is the IBS. Some people call it the itty-bitty ship, and you'll probably have your own pet names to give it. But the Navy calls it the inflatable boat, small. You will man it with 6 to 8 men who are about the same height. These men will be your boat crew." He drew a primitive picture on the board of the beach, ocean, and stickmen scattered around the IBS. He pointed to the stickmen scattered in the ocean. "This is you guys after a wave has just wiped you out." He drew a stickman on the beach. "This is one of you after the ocean spits you out. And guess what? The next thing the ocean is going to spit out is the boat." Instructor Blah used his eraser like a boat. "Now the 170-pound IBS is full of water and weighs about as much as a small car, and it's coming right at you here on the beach. What are you going to do? If you're standing in the road and a small car comes speeding at you, what are you going to do? Try to outrun it? Of course not. You're going to get out of the road. Same thing when the boat comes speeding at you. You're going to get out of the path it's traveling, run parallel to the beach. Some of you look sleepy. All of you drop and push them out." After push-ups and more instruction, we went outside where the sunshine had dimmed. Soon we stood by our boats facing the ocean. Bulky orange Kapok life jackets covered our battle dress uniforms, BDUs. We tied our hats to the top buttonholes on our shirts with orange cord. Each of us held our paddle like a rifle at the order arms position, waiting for our boat leaders to come back from where the instructors were briefing them. Before long, they returned and gave us orders. With boat handle in one hand and paddle in the other, all the crews raced into the water. Losers would pay with their flesh. It pays to be a winner. "One's in," our boat leader Mike H. called. Our two front men jumped into the boat and started paddling. I ran in water almost up to my knees. "Two's in." Two more jumped in and started paddling. "Three's in." I jumped in with the man across from me, and we paddled. Mike jumped in last, using his oar at the stern to steer. "Stroke! Stroke!" he called. In front of us, a 7-foot wave formed. I dug my paddle in deep and pulled back as hard as I could. "Dig, dig, dig!" Mike called. Our boat climbed up the face of the wave. I saw one of the other boats clear the tip. We weren't so lucky. The wave picked us up and slammed us down, sandwiching us between our boat and the water. As the ocean swallowed us, I swallowed boots, paddles, and cold seawater. I realized this could kill me. Eventually, the ocean spit us out onto the beach along with most of the other boat crews. The instructors greeted us by dropping us. With our boots on the boats, hands in the sand, and gravity against us, we did push-ups. Then we gathered ourselves together and went at it again, with more motivation and better teamwork. This time, we cleared the breakers. Back on shore, a boyish-faced trainee from another boat crew picked his paddle up off the beach. As he turned around to face the ocean, a passengerless boat filled with seawater raced at him sideways. Instructor Blah shouted into the megaphone, "Get out of there!" Boyface ran away from the boat, just like the instructors told us not to. Fear has a way of turning Einsteins into amoebas. "Run parallel to the beach! Run parallel to the beach!" Boyface continued to try to outrun the speeding boat. The boat came out of the water and slid sideways like a hovercraft over the hard, wet sand. When it ran out of hard, wet sand, its momentum carried it over the soft, dry sand until it hacked Boyface down. Instructor Blah, other instructors, and the ambulance rushed to the wounded man. Doc, one of the SEAL instructors, started first aid. No one heard Boyface call out in pain. The boat broke his leg at the thigh bone. As training progressed, dangers increased. Later in training, instead of landing our boats on the sand under the sun, we would land our boats on boulders at night in front of the Hotel del Coronado while ocean currents cut at us from two directions. Legend has it that those boulders used to be one rock before Bud's trainees cracked it with their heads. The sun lay buried in the horizon as we marched double time through the Naval Amphibious Base across the street. Wearing the same green uniforms, we sang out in cadence, looking confident, but the tension in the air was thick. If anybody is going to die, this is going to be the time. We arrived at the pool located at Building 164 and stripped down to our UDT swim shorts. An instructor said, "You are going to love this. Drown-proofing is one of my favorites. Sink or swim, sweet peas." I tied my feet together and my swim partner tied my hands behind my back. "When I give the command, the bound men will hop into the deep end of the pool," Instructor Stoneclam said. "You must bob up and down 20 times, float for 5 minutes, swim to the shallow end of the pool, turn around without touching the bottom, swim back to the deep end, do a forward and backward somersault underwater, and retrieve a face mask from the bottom of the pool with your teeth." The hardest part for me was swimming the length of the pool and back with my feet tied together and hands tied behind my back. I had to flip around like a dolphin. Even so, I'd rather be doing this than being awakened from a dead sleep and slapped around. Although I did my duty, others didn't. We lost a muscular black guy because his body was so dense that he just sank like a rock to the bottom of the pool. A skinny red-headed hospital corpsman jumped in the water, but instead of swimming straight, he swam in a horseshoe. An instructor told him, "Swim in a straight line. What the hell is wrong with you?" The instructors found out later that Redhead was almost blind. He had forged his medical records to get to Bud's. For every guy who would do anything to get in, there were guys who wanted to get out. Stone Clam wouldn't let them. "You can't quit now," Instructor Stone Clam screamed. "This is only indoc. Training hasn't even started yet." We were still only in the indoctrination phase. After 3 weeks of indoc, we began first phase, basic conditioning. Our class continued to shrink due to performance failures, injuries, and quitting. I wondered how much longer I could continue without being dropped because of a performance failure or an injury. Of course, most evolutions were a kick in the crotch, designed to punish us. Woe to the trainee who let the pain show in his face. An instructor would say, "You didn't like that? Well, do some more." Likewise to the trainee who showed no pain. "You liked that? Here's another kick in the crotch." The torment continued throughout each day. Push-ups, runs, push-ups, calisthenics, push-ups, swims, push-ups, O-course, day after day, week after week. We ran a mile one way just to eat a meal. Round trip multiplied by 3 meals made for 6 miles a day just to eat. We never...
That was part 1 of Chapter 5, The Only Easy Day Was Yesterday, from SEAL Team 6 by Howard-wasdin. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.